The rejection email hadn't even arrived yet, but Adrian Cole already felt it burning in his chest as he stepped out of the towering glass building, his daughter's tiny hand wrapped tightly around his own. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the bright afternoon sky, melting against the warmth of his regret. He had failed. Again. And this time, it wasn't just about him. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of unexpected miracles, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to And Stories. Your support keeps these heartfelt stories alive and spreading hope. It was early afternoon, and the city looked almost beautiful under the soft winter sunlight. The polished steel of the skyscrapers reflected a pale blue sky, and people hurried past in tailored coats, their lives seemingly certain, stable, successful. Adrian felt like a smudge on that polished surface. At 34, he had once been a promising project manager in a mid-sized tech firm. But life had shifted violently 3 years ago when his wife passed away after a sudden illness, leaving him alone with their 5-year-old daughter, Maris. Maris walked beside him now, her red ladybug backpack bouncing gently against her small shoulders. She had insisted on coming to the interview because the babysitter had cancelled, and Adrian couldn't afford to miss this opportunity. He had dressed her neatly, braided her soft brown hair himself, and promised her that everything would be fine. He had believed it when he said it. The interview had been his shot at stability. Aurora Dynamics, one of the fastest-growing renewable energy companies in the country, was known not only for its innovation but for its visionary leadership. The CEO, Vivian Laurent, had built the company from nothing into a billion-dollar enterprise before turning 40. Adrian had read every article about her. He admired her resilience, her intelligence, the way she spoke about sustainability as if it were a moral responsibility rather than a business strategy. But admiration hadn't been enough. Inside the sleek conference room, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, he had felt small. His suit was slightly outdated. His answers, though honest, lacked the sharp edge of corporate polish. When asked about managing high-pressure deadlines, he had spoken about balancing work with raising Maris alone. He had thought it showed responsibility. Instead, he saw polite smiles and quick notes scribbled on paper. And then, the final blow. A question about a failed project from his previous job. He had been honest again. He explained how budget cuts and staffing issues had led to delays. But he also admitted he could have fought harder for his team. The room had grown quiet. He knew then that honesty did not always win. Now, as the glass doors closed behind him, he squeezed Maris's hand gently. She looked up at him with eyes far too perceptive for her age. She had heard enough inside that conference room to understand that something hadn't gone right. He tried to smile, but it faltered halfway. The cold air filled his lungs, sharp and unforgiving. He wondered how many more interviews he could endure before hope simply ran out. His savings were thinning. Rent was due in 2 weeks. Maris needed new winter boots. He had been calculating and recalculating the numbers in his head for months. They had almost reached the sidewalk when he heard hurried footsteps echoing behind them. At first, he ignored it, assuming it was another executive late for a meeting. But the sound grew louder, more urgent, accompanied by the sharp rhythm of heels striking pavement. He turned slightly, confused. Vivian Laurent was running toward him. The billionaire CEO, known for her composure and calculated decisions, was running through the afternoon snow, her crimson suit blazing against the pale backdrop of the city. She held a folder tightly under her arm, strands of her dark hair escaping her neat bun. People slowed to stare. Adrian's heart pounded in disbelief. She stopped just a few feet away, catching her breath, her eyes fixed not on him at first, but on Maris. There was something in her expression that Adrian couldn't immediately understand. It wasn't pity. It wasn't corporate courtesy. It was recognition. Earlier, during the interview, while the other executives had asked questions, Vivian had remained mostly silent. But she had watched. She had noticed the way Maris quietly colored in a small notebook in the corner, careful not to interrupt. She had noticed how Adrian, even under pressure, glanced at his daughter with reassuring eyes. And she had noticed something else. When the assistant accidentally knocked over a glass of water near Maris, Adrian had instinctively stepped forward, not to protect his own documents, not to shield himself, but to shield his daughter's drawing. His priorities were visible in that small, unconscious moment. Vivian had built her empire on innovation, yes, but also on values. Her own father had once lost a job because he chose to attend her school recital instead of an unexpected meeting. She still remembered the quiet shame in his eyes when he explained it to her. She had been 10. Standing there on the sidewalk, she made a decision that would ripple far beyond that afternoon. She told Adrian that technically, the panel had concerns. His corporate experience had gaps. His last project had indeed failed. But leadership was not only about flawless resumes. It was about character under pressure. She said she had spent years surrounded by brilliant people who lacked empathy, who saw employees as numbers and deadlines as gods. Aurora Dynamics was expanding rapidly, and what she needed now was not just another strategist. She needed someone who understood responsibility at a human level. Adrian felt as though the world had paused around him. The traffic noise seemed distant. Snowflakes continued their gentle descent, but he barely noticed. Vivian offered him a 6-month contract as a project coordinator, with the potential for permanent leadership if he proved himself. It wasn't charity, it wasn't sympathy, it was an opportunity. He struggled to process it. Minutes ago, he had been mentally rehearsing how to explain another rejection to his daughter. Now, the CEO herself was offering him a lifeline. Maris tugged on his sleeve, looking between the two adults, sensing the shift in energy. Adrian knelt down, brushing a snowflake from her coat, and whispered that maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. The first months were not easy. Adrian worked harder than he ever had before. He arrived early, often with Maris in tow before school, dropping her off afterward with neighbors who had kindly agreed to help. He studied company data late at night after she slept. He asked questions, sometimes embarrassing ones. He admitted when he didn't know something instead of pretending. Some colleagues doubted him. Whispers followed him in hallways. They knew he had failed the interview. They assumed he had been hired out of sympathy. The pressure to prove himself weighed heavily on his shoulders. But Adrian remembered that moment on the sidewalk. He remembered that someone had seen something in him worth running for. One afternoon, a major client threatened to withdraw from a renewable energy project due to delays and budget concerns. The room filled with tension as senior managers debated aggressive tactics to pressure the client into compliance. Adrian listened carefully, his mind racing. Then he spoke up. Instead of confrontation, he suggested transparency. He proposed inviting the client to tour the project site, to meet the engineers, to understand the obstacles firsthand. He believed trust could replace suspicion. There were skeptical glances, but Vivian nodded slowly. The meeting with the client changed everything. Seeing the dedication of the team, understanding the logistical challenges, the client chose not only to stay but to increase their investment. That project became one of Aurora Dynamics' most successful ventures. Gradually, the whispers quieted. Adrian's confidence grew, not because he felt superior, but because he felt aligned with his values. He led with honesty. He advocated for flexible hours for parents in the company. He started a mentorship program for young interns from underprivileged backgrounds. 6 months turned into a permanent contract. On the anniversary of that snowy afternoon, Vivian invited him to her office. The city glowed under clear daylight, no snow this time, just bright sun reflecting possibility. She told him that companies thrive not only on innovation but on integrity. She had taken a risk running after him that day, but she had trusted her instinct. Adrian thought about the version of himself who had walked out of the building defeated, unaware that his lowest moment was only minutes away from transformation. He thought about Maris, who now proudly told her classmates that her father helped save the planet. He thought about rent paid on time, about laughter returning to their small apartment, about hope replacing fear. Success had not arrived like a thunderclap. It had come quietly, carried by the footsteps of a woman who chose to see beyond a resume. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like, comment, and share it. Stories like this remind us that one act of belief can change an entire future. And before we reach the end, I have a special request for you. Comment the word second chance if you believe that one moment of kindness can rewrite someone's destiny. Years later, Adrian would sometimes stand outside the same glass building, watching new candidates walk in with nervous eyes and hopeful hearts. He made it a personal ritual to greet them warmly when he could. He remembered too well what it felt like to think everything was over. The world often measures people by their failures. But sometimes, the most important thing is who runs after you when you think you've lost. On that winter afternoon, a billionaire CEO ran through the snow, not to rescue a broken man, but to recognize a capable one. And that made all the difference.